Hi, my name is Benedict for Higher Hertz. In this video, we're looking at Iris 2 from iZotope. It has been out for a long time now, but its value proposition appears to have changed quite a bit from when it first came out. It is a truly fascinating instrument for a sound designer. It's built on samples, but it's really a synthesizer that's just got a hole in the back, or four holes in the back, for you to plug samples into. By my saying sampler, please don't immediately think that this just makes it a beat maker for loops and drums and stuff. There's nothing to stop you from putting drums into this and doing interesting things with them, but its greatest strength lies in how you approach using those samples that you put in, which we will look at a lot more as we go. It's got sort of a simple architecture, but sort of a complex or unusual architecture at the same time. Your oscillator is a sample. You can have up to 4 of them, 1, 2, 3, that one's not loaded, but generally you'll look at one at a time. You can switch across and look at those as a waveform, but you will find mostly you're looking at them in this format, which makes sense as we go, as will the strange loopy looking shape. You've then got 5 LFO modulators, 5 envelope modulators, and controllers, and there are actually macros as well. You've got some sample controls. Sound effects I didn't look at all, but you've got the same effects as masters and 1 filter. So your 4 samples can go through 1 filter, and they're nice filters. And out of that, it's how it works, how it comes together, as well as the nice sound from the filters and how they manage the oscillator forms, that you get this really beautiful instrument, especially for pads. Doesn't mean you can't make anything with it, but it's an absolute, I don't want to say beast because that makes it sound nasty, but it's a beautiful device for pads. Let's have a quick look through. As soon as I got it, I made a piece with it. Straight away, just no thoughts, it was like, oh, that's a great sound, I'm using that. So we'll dip through. Insects. No samples of insects used here. Pure synthesis. Big fat pad, lots of movement. Now the yo 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 sound, again, just a sample and synthesis. Drums, synth brass. Another lead sound. And bringing it all together. And just so you can see, absolutely everything is done with Iris 2. The only thing that has any extra is this bell sound, which has an extra frequency shifter, not pitch shifter, but frequency shifter in the delay. Pretty standard on the setup, and one of my own reverbs to bring the whole thing together. So again, really, really nice synth, just straight away had me go, yeah, I'm going to make a piece of music with this. Now that's the second time that has happened for me with this instrument. Iris, I don't remember when it came out, but it's going back quite a lot of years now, and I remember Iris 2 in particular being released and being very sort of like, oh, but at the 150 mark at that time, it was not a thing I could realistically justify moving to seeing I had access to everything I really needed at the time. But I picked it up about a year ago, and I have a sneaky feeling it might have come free. I really can't remember the circumstances in which I got it, but I got it. And straight away made a peace with it and was like, wow, it's just, for me and this just connected and we flow together really nicely. But I did get frustrated at the time because I felt like, while this is kind of cool and I worked nicely with it, there seemed to be a bug. I realized this time around that it wasn't a bug. It's just that unfortunately their GUI, like as is quite common with VST interfaces, is just a little out clevering in itself, and that there was a feature that I had missed. And I had no idea that I had missed said feature. Once I found that, it's like, oh, you have to make it to change this thing before it behaves in the way you think it's going to behave, which to me is just, the designer may like to do it that way, but if most people expect it to work a different way, why would you default it to what makes it seem like it doesn't work? So some little things like that, they're really the only negatives that I have about it. I think it's an absolutely gorgeous instrument with a different approach. So if you expect it to be just another Kontakt, another sort of TAL sampler type, straight meat and potatoes, put your stuff in and hack it up and it's probably going to confuse or infuriate you. But if you come in from the perspective of I want to be able to make beautiful, unusual sounds, things that can go everything from kind of a very basic, mini Moog type synth, right the way out to evolving pads, or I'm not going to say sequences, but it does get you into that territory. If you go down the right roads, then Iris 2 offers an awful lot. We've got the oscillator, which is a sample, which you can feed it. You can view it as a waveform, but mostly you're going to view it as this spectrum, which will make more sense, as will the blobby picture on the front. You've got 5 LFOs and 5 envelopes, which are pretty freely assignable, as are some controllers and the ubiquitous macros, except they've got 8, which is twice the usual 4. Sample controls, sound effects I didn't use, but they appear to be the same as the master effects, and it seems to be an either or as to how you route them. Fair enough. The effects overall are pretty good, pretty usable, and 1 filter. So you've got the 4 slots, but they all get summed to 1 filter. So you don't have the ability to make 4 separate patches in a layer. You put your layers together, then you filter them. Could be seen as a limit, but when you use the instrument the way it is, it's no limit at all. Let's have a look at what it is, where it comes from. iZotope. iZotope are a very big name in this game, mostly known for Ozone and their mixing tools. Very honestly, not a fan of iZotope's mixing tools. Not saying they're bad or wrong, but everything about the approach as I see it, well, that ain't how I was trained. But in terms of their tools and the quality of their algorithms based on these filters and the like, yeah, no dramas there at all. The instrument itself came out to some real wonder from people like myself and what have you, but I think it confused a lot of people. There were 2 players in the market at this point that were sort of really kind of pushing a boundary. There was Waldorf's Nave, which was a wavetable synth, and nobody rightly knew what to do with the damn thing at all. I remember looking at it and also going, ooh, that's interesting. But people were very slow on the uptake. They were still rather obsessed with the idea of analog, but analog in that weird sort of techno way rather than the modern weird way. It's sort of, it came within the middle of the revision, and this and Nave were too early. The wave table thing didn't really take off till I think it was Serum, but this was one of those instruments that was taking a different stab at how we might handle our samples, and that's where it absolutely shines. In terms of price, it was, as I said, $150 when it first came at. And that was a pretty big investment, especially for an instrument that seemed on the surface to be a little bit of a one-trick pony, and I don't think I even tried it at the time. I got it about a year ago, and just like now, I immediately just made a peace with it instantly and was really delighted, and in many ways really enjoyed using it, but I felt like there was a bug, something I couldn't work out how to solve. I worked out this time, partly by chance and partly by having spent some more time with similar sort of interfaces as this, that made me think, what if? And so I worked out what was wrong. Some of the, just poor thinking. But it's quite common now that you see this advertised for $10, or I think I even got it for free. And that's a massively different value proposition. Doesn't mean that I'm saying, oh, go out and get it because it'll instantly make you. It won't. You've got to use it yourself, and you've got to work out how to make this thing fly, which is not that hard if you are a competent synthesist. But if you're somebody who pokes presets, you might go like, what the? But in terms of what it will do, at $150, I think it's fair. But at $10, it's absolutely awesome if you are the right person to fly this little battleship. We might as well go into the good and bad. The good is it sounds very good. Its algorithms for how it's handling the sample and what you do to the sample are very good. It's mostly really quite easy to use. You do have to understand the paradigm in which it works and its quirks, but it's mostly surprisingly simple to use, which in that sense is really great because I find I just fly into lovely sounds. And it is unique. This is great. It's one of those synths that there's nothing quite like it. It's not to say that the sounds that you get out of it are going to be vastly different from any other synthesizer. No, but you will be knowing that, so long as you're making your own sounds, that they're not the same cliche sounds that are coming out of the same instrument that everybody else is using. And that's a big win when you are playing the indie game, because you need to stamp yourself as being different from exactly every other person who's trying to clone, I don't know, Taylor Swift or Ed Sheeran or whoever they're trying to clone this week. In terms of its bads or its limited, well, probably the number one is that it's got a slightly clunky GUI, which you do have to come to terms with and sometimes have to dig or do things that you might not have expected. If you are always just using big VST synths, then you probably think, why is that an issue? Because you're used to that kind of thing. If you're not, just understand that it behaves the way it behaves, and it behaves the way that it behaves, and it has the one filter. Part of me thinks, oh, why can't I have 4 of these? One on each of the lines of the instrument, but it's being greedy and honestly quite pointless, and it probably would have made the instrument harder to program. So the 4 samples, so that's like 4 oscillators going through one filter. Just use another instance of the instrument if you really need, or if you're using something like Reason, then you put them in a combinator. There are so many solutions to what's a problem so small as to really not be a problem, and probably was a better solution than the problems they would have created if they had done it differently. So really, I don't think there are any great negatives past its slightly clunky interface. Now let's do what we do and walk our way through the instrument. If you look into presets, there are some in categories, and they do sound good. We can range from things that could go up against a Mini, right the way through to things that would kind of more go up against a Phantom or a Motif or something like that. This thing is good. That's ugly. But while you'll have these sorts of sounds, you will not get meat and potatoes pianos, what have you. That's not to say that you can't make them in here. Isn't that lovely? But you're not getting a big library full of Spitfire sounds. It's just not the idea here. I mean, you might personally say, okay, well, I'll grab a sample of a Labs piano or something and put it in here and then make my own instrument from it. That's what it's designed to do. Pads it absolutely is gorgeous for. That's why I say sort of phantom or motif, or if you're old enough, Wave Station. And I think that was always kind of the expectation, that it would shine in this arena. You heard similar in the piece. So that's using LFOs, which is what I did to make the insects and the various other sorts of sounds. But the combination of LFOs and how we manage this waveform is where it gets interesting. New. Yay. New provides us or presents us with absolutely nothing. It's a silent synth. There are a couple of ways we can go. There are some preset samples that are already built in. You can't audition them. That's, I guess, a little bit of a limit, but, you know, it's not that big a deal. Yes. There are also, and this is nice, some basic oscillator waves. It's a little shrinky-dink. You can resize, but it's still prone. It doesn't resize the whole thing, it just resizes the footprint. It doesn't resize the text. So we've got a basic oscillator. Let's work through the basic synth architecture. We can put our basic oscillator into a filter. They'll step a little from the knobs, but not in modulation. In terms of filters, you've got low pass, high pass, band pass, and peak. And within each of these, you've got kind of emulation of different styles. And they are very nice sounding filters. They're not flashy, but once you get them into use, they just sound great. We don't want the high pass, low pass. And then you go to Master Effects. There's a distortion, a chorus, which we'll look at closer. A delay, and a reverb. We'll just leave the little bit of delay on for the moment. Now I probably do need to up its output. My apologies. Let's do that here. We're just checking levels there. It is, thankfully, one of those synths that doesn't run super hot. You see, I get frustrated when synths come out and they're already clipping with the first note or couple of notes. This doesn't run hot, and that's actually a really good thing about it. But basic architecture, and then we can fly in our envelopes. Now 5 is defaulted to the amplifier output. You might think it's going to be 1, but 5 kind of makes sense because, well, it's the last thing before it goes out the door. So while you might think, oh, it's going to be 1, 5 makes perfect sense. They go out to 10 seconds, which is pretty good. No real sense of frustration there with the controls, and you can reshape these as you see fit, which is nice. And as you see, you can act on the picture or on the knobs. Really quite straight and simple, and so it gives us the advantage of a simple ADSR with the ability to wobbly the curves in any way that we like. Simple, works great. If we want to assign an envelope to something, then we click till we get the little thingy, and then we click over here. Simple as that. And then, of course, the same with all the controllers and what have you. There is the option to map your samples. So you can, we can't move this window, you can map your samples so that they only take up part of the key range. So if you really wanted to, you could put up to 4 multi-samples of, here's my piano here, here's my piano here, here's my piano here. It's probably not going to give you the results you're hoping for, but nonetheless you can do it, so you can layer and what have you, but it's only in terms of key. It doesn't seem to have a velocity thing, but there may well be a way to handle velocity across the layers as well. I just haven't thought about it because I'm simple. That's a basic sense of structure, but where it really gets exciting is what you can do. Let's just open this one back out again. With what you can do with our oscillator. Now you see down here there are all these little things, and do they give you tooltips? I think they do. I think I turned the tooltip thing off. It was in the settings. Show tooltips. There we go. Back again. So if we hover, they show us what they're going to do. There we go. So we can select part of something. Undos don't work there. But hear how that suddenly now sounds rather interesting. Anything that's highlighted in blue is going to play. Anything that's not becomes invisible. Might take a little bit to get your head around it, which means that what we're looking at is a map of the frequency. So if we look here, we see this frequency has, now how do I move back here? This frequency, or the wave shape, is changing as we gewooble it around here. So the overtones that are here in blue are playing, but where they're missing, they're gone. Which is why we're hearing that wow, wow, because that is being altered. So let's now go with a, okay, this is the one, let's just, and let's sort of pick that back up. So what it's doing is the same as what's happening in Serum and Europa and what have you. It's taking in that sample, it's pulling it apart with IIRs or FIRs or whatever. It's chopping it up very digitally and working out what the spectrum is. So it's basically turning it into an additive synthesizer waveform and then giving us a tool by which we can rearrange that additive waveform in real time. That's why it sounds like an additive synth now. And so whatever is on screen and has color on it will play. We can choose a particular partial and just play that. You can hear where it starts to pick up another one. little bit. You will get pops and what have you, it's creative, so we gotta... And being a sample, it will naturally just take what it's got, speed it up, slow it down, which is why you hear the Mickey Mouse and the Satan on the other side. If you get into your modes, obviously we can move forward and backwards, we can move backwards and then forward. So we've also got a couple of different ways as to how we resample. Resample is just the straight, slow it down, speed it up, what people refer to as tape mode these days. You've got fixed, which means it doesn't respond to the keyboard at all. Which probably means that if we used key tracking, I haven't tried this, key tracking. It does then behave basically like tape modes, just changing our speed, which is fair enough. That's what I would expect, but it was worth a look. Then the third is called Radius, RT, and it's a powerful algorithm, bearing in mind this is a long time ago, so before DSP was as freely available as we have now on our i7s or i9s or whatever. 4 voices available. It's got some real limits on it, and this is going to be a limit of the instrument, but yeah, whatever. So we'll let it do that. And this tries to keep the behavior the same across the different keys. You can set it to high quality, what have you, or you can change the number of samples that you can run with. All of that's going to depend on your computer. You can't see it, but my CPU usage on this has close to doubled. Not problematic as such, but personally I don't see the win in it. Play with it, see how you go. I think this is far quirkier and far cooler. And you've got various tools for how you can draw on the screen. That's just... So we can pick out particular parts that we want. Like we might say, okay, I want to start my sound here, and then sort of halfway through, I want to move it to here. Let's give ourselves a little bit of crossover. Because we're choosing to use the lower harmonics, and then we're choosing to use some of the higher harmonics. And that's possibly not the nicest example, but it's good to start with logic to work out what's going on. Because these are cycling at different rates, it becomes more interesting as time goes by. People made whole records on that sort of stuff from the 30s to the 60s, maybe early 70s. Picking on drawing particular things, that's cool. And then you've got the freeform one. And they don't have to tie together. That's probably gotten a little quiet. So we can take any sample, and it can be a complex sample, and then start drawing things on it or choosing particular areas. The tools are essentially the same tools that you're using in Photoshop. So if you're familiar with Photoshop, then, that sort of gets you there. Actually, point of interest that I didn't check to see, and is probably worth it, is if I change this sample, what happens? I can open up and I can add samples from anywhere. This is showing me this. Let's go back up. We don't want those. Let's go to, no, not for tables. Not those. This is probably not the easiest place to look. I won't look there again. Let's just go. No, it's probably what we have to do. Oh yeah, we can go here. So let's pick an environment one. Animals. What happens if I load that? Yeah, it keeps the same shape. Sorry, a little bit of mucking around there, but it's not a thing I tried. So if we put a oscillator form in here as the stable or sensible part of the sound, saw and voice, why not? You get the idea. You can start to build up quite complex sounds really, really quickly. As you saw from here, we can access our drives. So if we go to somewhere where there are samples, which are refills, sample plus filter probably has samples. Samples, no, we don't want noise, that's going to be boring. Let's choose this fella. That's a short sample, obviously. And it's tried to choose where it wants that to go. So I'm going to put that back. I'm pressing C3 and it's showing C4, so you just got to deal with that discrepancy. That's more like it. But if we didn't want everything that's there, we can say, all right, how about we draw something like that. And because it's a very short sample, then that changes what we hear, but it's pretty sort of short. None of these are likely to be particularly long because that's okay. That's cool. It's then just how we build that up. So we've got a nice enough ADSR going on. You will find that with digital synthesis, linear often sounds nicer. I don't know why, it just does. Let's add a little bit of the old LFO. So we want to take its output, which is here. You've got to make sure you've actually picked up the little thing and send it to, let's say, just here. Its default assignments can be a little okay, but once you understand how it works, it's fine. So we're changing our rate, which is a little on the tiny side. While you hear a pulsating sequence type thing, that's just from the changes in the speed of what's happening with the shape that we've drawn there. If you wanted that to come in another way, then you'd be using an LFO type thing, but then you probably wouldn't be using this instrument to get those sorts of varieties. So let's pull ourselves in another oscillator. Okay, that's interesting. It didn't go back to where we were before, which is, well, a little annoying. Not there. Refills, production files. Won't be in there. What's in here? Faux guitar. I think I've used this a few times. And we can solo this sound. Now that just makes a nice sound exactly as it sits. Working great. Don't really need to do anything complex to that at all. Let's find something else. And again, it's gone back to... maybe if I reopen the existing open oscillator, it'll send me to somewhere useful, but it seems to start over again every time. Again, just one of those things you're going to have to get used to. And a little choir. Who doesn't want one of them? Now this is right for having a little bit of the old hack and slash happen to it. But not quite so hacky. I'm going to crossfade that quite a lot. So that way we're not hearing the ting 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 as the loop goes round. We could also forwards and backwards it. But then that's limiting our range, so let's pull that back. And that too. That gets rid of the ting ting and probably works nicer than the crossfades. Let's give ourselves some filter movement. So some of that will come from our envelope, which might be just a little enthusiastic. Sorry, let's turn that level back up again. Keep forgetting that that's not static. And with very little work, we've now got a surprisingly complex and beautiful sound. We can turn off our effects. And yeah, we got some clicks and pops and what have you, but that's to be expected. But the effects in this case work really, really nicely. They're not what I would use for everything, but as a starting point, they are well suited to the instrument and what you're probably doing with it. But like any onboards, don't assume that's the only way to do it, and also don't load the sound too heavily with especially things like reverb, which, while they make it sound lovely now, mean that the reverb space here and the reverb space for the room of your piece can either end up overdoing it in total or becoming a conflict, because each sound that you've reverbed here at the instrument probably is putting that sound into a different space. Not so much with pads, it's not quite so bad. But if you've got more rhythmic or melodic instruments and they've got a ton of reverb here, then you may find that they seem like they're all in odd places, which is not necessarily where you want them in the mix. So if you're struggling with the mix to get your positioning here, which is far more important than positioning there, then look at reverbs and delays here and make sure that they match so that you can have the sense of things belonging where they belong. But in pure sound design, these work very nicely. We'll flip through some other filters. It's got full filter tracking at the moment. Tokyo would suggest that it's supposed to be Roland E. Warm synth, I'm not sure. Maybe that's Obi. Driving a little bit now. They're similar, but they are nice. And then, of course, your high passes, band passes, what have you. So the limit of the one filter being simply that you can't put a band pass on this one, a band pass on this one, a band pass on this one, and then a low pass on the sum of them without getting into combinators or something. But I don't see it ultimately as a killer. Again, very nice filter forms, because they're versatile. They don't scream too much on their own, although they will whine a bit, which is nice. But as in, they don't have too much character that they're going to become problematic. And that's basically it. The one thing where I did get tripped up. Now let's go and take an LFO. Is LFO1 assigned to anything? Yes, it is, so we better take LFO2. Now, it's sometimes a little hard to know what's assigned. There's no real way of looking at your whole patch, but LFO1 has been assigned here. There may be some way of looking at this. Current assignments, there you go. So you have to right-click, and it took me a while to realize that right-click was important in this instrument, because to be fair, Reason right-click is system, not instrument unique anywhere near as much as it tends to be on VST. So we'll take number 2 and we'll assign it to our cutoff. Now notice what happens here. Let's raise our rate a little bit. While it's doing what we expect, it is also not doing what we expect, because we've given it a full assignment and yet it's only moving a little bit, which I took to be, well, that's broken. But right-click, edit amount, so you can get into very specific amounts. Clear, we don't want to do. LFO, we can assign 2 things, so we can back assign the other way, so I can assign this 2 particular things, controllers and what have you, but it's here, combine. How do we combine the input of 2 modulators? And it's been defaulted to multiply, which is probably very sensible if it's going to be LFO and mod wheel. But every time I've assigned it, I've actually been wanting to add. So while I love the idea of something having an LFO and then multiply its amount with my mod wheel, in this case it didn't really make sense. So now I've got the results that I assume from what I'm looking at. which is we've got a little bit of envelope movement and a huge amount of LFO movement. So if we reduce our LFO movement, we've got both of them behaving exactly as we would anticipate that they would. And then we could add a third here, and this is where it does behave the way that I anticipate. So you just have to kind of use mods 1 and 3 if you want to use 2 and not change anything, or if you're going to want to add 3 assignments that are separate from each other, you have to go in and change them. The fact that you have got the ability to modify one with another is cool, but one of the limits is you've only got 3. You've got 3 slots, and then once we've hit those 3 slots, we can't modify this any further. So just a limit, something you've kind of got to be aware of. See, we end up with quite a different behavior there with a minimum or a maximum or a multiplier. The fact that they're there, those mathificate upon each other options, is good. You just have to know they're there and remember to use them. So in simple terms, what they've assumed is that we would go LFO, mod wheel to define how much of the LFO is happening as a performance, and then some other modulator. There. Makes sense, but it's not apparent on the surface, and you've only got 3. But it's not a thing that's going to bother you that much. You've got so much potential for movement already in everything else. So that little bit of movement there really is quite lovely. We can open this up and look at things a little bit differently with our envelopes and what have you, and that means that you get a bigger screen here, but I don't love these windows that leap around kind of thing. You can also turn particular things on and off, which is, I guess, handy if you're wanting more real estate and more to be able to define and draw. Excuse me, I've got to note something on my screen or it's going to have a cow. And that basically is the instrument. It's surprisingly easy to use. Where lots of synths have lots and lots of things, we can dig into all of the intricacies, but there's just no need. You will play with it and you'll work out how it works and how to get there. The first few times you might be like, but then you work out how it feels and you roll with it. But that ability to get these kinds of sounds is just nice. I should show you how the effects work. You turn an effect on, otherwise it's not available. You mix it in, and to actually get control of it, you then open another little window. Little absurd, but, you know, it works. Drives. I'm probably not going to use them a lot, to be honest. Rippin'. But they are interesting. When you can't get enough aliasing. And the same goes for the others. So chorus, it is a chorus, that's it. Depth, rate. But look, you can modulate things as well. So our delay at the box doesn't have any way to be modulated. And that's a little bit like, really? So we can pick an LFO, drag ourselves out to here, and we've got to go again, and here. Needs to be not synced, otherwise it will just lurch. Probably need to reduce our mounts, so 0.1. 1. We can still hear the movement, but you've got to. The LFOs default to restart, which means that they start every time you press a key, which is okay, but for this sort of situation, you've got to make sure that's turned off. It's a little heavy, but you get the point. Everything sounds very digitally smooth. So in terms of, I don't know, maybe people aren't going to like the comparisons, but thinking of an Omnisphere or something like that, you know, big, beautiful, digital smooth. That's a little wonky. Within the LFOs, you can reshape things depending upon each LFO's setup. So they are a kind of a wavetable themselves, often set up to particular things. I don't think you can load your own LFOs, but I have a sneaky suspicion there may be a way to do it. But don't take that as a given, you'd have to go research that yourself. You can, of course, modulate things like rates and everything else. So most things are modulatable. You've got some interesting shapes. You saw the use of the pyramid before. You can hear that lurching a bit. And so the various forms. So in this case, one multiplies by the other. So if you're after, say, a sine wave, but you want it to be a little bit more complex, just understand that the more you multiply, the faster the rate goes. So you've got to turn your rate knob down. The more you multiply, the faster it's actually going. But you hear that on the delay is now far less regular. Oh, they're still regular, but it's just not as obvious. So it's a little more natural, or in this case, spooky. I think that's sort of about it as an overview. It's a very unusual instrument. It's one you've got to understand how it plays, but it's not in a strange way, just in a unique way, because of its modulations, its slightly unusual decisions, which makes sense, but you have to know that they're there. Things like knowing to right-click is pretty important. We can do things like through here as well, right-click. I just don't naturally right-click, as I say, because Reason tends to be system stuff on a right-click. And that ability to load several different waveforms, make them do interesting things, and then assigning them through this rather lovely filter and interesting effects. But there's no reason to have to use those effects. You can get rid of them and then run all your effects off board for any unique or special things that you want to do. That's basically it. I've moved through this fairly quickly because even though it's a synth that's as deep as you want it to be, it's quite simple on the surface, disarmingly so, which is great because it gets you straight into it, and then you can keep loading samples and drawing pretty pictures on them and working out how you're going to put its elements together to get your own fascinating, beautiful sounds. And it's not just for pads, it does work nicely for melodic and what have you kinds of sounds as well. It'll just start out probably more with pads because that's where it immediately shines. Great instrument, delighted that I got it, delighted that I spent a little bit more time and actually understood what I thought to be a bug as being a feature and how that works. If you're going to pick it up for $9, and you're a sound designer, absolutely go for it. But just take your time, because there's so much to be achieved with it. Again, this is one of those instruments that I could make album after album after album with the one device, and samples sounds that I created to feed it. And there's no reason why I can't take this, sample it off, feed it back into the beast, and have another round. I watched a whole video on someone doing that on the whole paint stripper wub 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 kind of thing, and then he was building it up that way rather than using Serum. He was just using a fairly conventional simple synth and just kept sampling it and putting it back through and back through and back through until he ended up with, well, I thought it was a horrible sound, but it was an impressive sound within its own arena. So it's an instrument that you can do a lot with. My name is Benedict for Higher Hertz. If you do have a question about this kind of stuff, but not support for the device, please, because that's on iZotope. But if questions about sort of any of the content within here, then ask away, preferably after hitting the subscribe button, because that's getting value from us and that tells YouTube that you're valuing us and helps us to become more visible in the algorithm. Sad to ask, but this is the way the game is played. Higherhertz.com as well is worth a visit. There's a different channel of information over there. You have a great day.